Hi. Hi, I'm Tanya Janca, and I'm at Splunk Conf 20. And I was just attending the fraud, the missing link. I don't know if any of you were there, but so I used to work at CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency, and I worked at a bunch of other government departments. And actually, before I was even in the government, I worked in private industry. And strangely, for some reason, as a software developer, I got looped in fairly often to, we think there's some embezzling happen. We think there's some fraud happening. There's some sort of bot abusing us. Can you look into this? And I didn't understand that those were security issues until much later in my life. And so when I was looking at the schedule, I'm like, oh, they have tools. They have tools. I want to see the tools. And so basically, the presentation was by two different guys, Andrew and Gleb. And so Andrew went on about how he had tried using kind of older tools, and that then over time he'd switched to more advanced tools, and how things had advanced over time, and specifically like talking about how what was missing from their current tool set. And then Gleb went on to show like the brand new tool from Splunk. So first, I was thinking I kind of like go over some of the things that they covered. So there's only so many things that I am allowed telling you because, well, basically they showed us a guy right at the front where he's like, okay, so don't tell everyone the secrets to our new products unless they come to the thing. So I'm just gonna tell you some of it. Also, you are totally allowed putting stuff into the chat and asking questions if you want. Okay, so Andrew was talking about what's missing, and I actually felt a lot of his pain. So he's talking about, extended linking through multiple stops. You couldn't do that. So actually, let me back up. So they did a presentation last year called Bot, the Missing Link, and they were talking about like how you can track links to see if fraud is happening. And so if someone sends some stuff or comes right from a place that you know is like an IP address that's definitely to do with phishing, or some other fraud, or like a phone number. So I don't know if you've ever had like a phone call and it's from some number you don't know, and then it's definitely obviously a fraud phone call, and they're like, we are the IRS. And I'm like, but I live in Canada, so why would you be calling me? And they're like, and you have to give us all your money now. We're going to put your children in jail. I'm like, I don't even have offspring. And so you're like, this is probably fraud. So all those phone numbers and IP addresses and all these other things, like there was no way that you could really track like the extended linking, if that makes sense. And it was really hard to visualize. So he was showing us like a bunch of different examples where it basically looks like a really awful spider web, like 100 spider webs on top of each other. Or I don't know if you've ever seen that. I saw this like visualization from Netflix about their like APIs, and it's like this is what a million APIs looked like, and it just looked like a little kid had like scribbled on the paper over and over and over and over again. It's like you can't see anything. So he's talking about how it's like you can't really go deep in, or you couldn't before, and you couldn't show multiple relationships. Like you couldn't say like, okay, so this fraud number has to do with these four different IPs, but this one IP has to actually do with four different phone numbers. So it was like kind of hard to tell what was going on. And so him and Gleb both work at Splunk, and they know each other. And so then they wanted better diagrams, and so all the diagrams he kept showing us were like circles and lines. He's like, I wanted more than circles and lines, which I found funny. And so I'm like, okay, I agree. And another thing he kept talking about was duplicates and like how to track duplicates. So when you're looking through a ton of data, if there's duplicates, sometimes, depending on what you're doing, you're able to just take all those duplicates out and ignore them because you just want to see one of each thing. But sometimes I need to know there's 360 duplicates of this one record, so weigh it more heavily. I used to have to massage evidence when I worked at the Department of Justice for Canada, and we'd get these huge amounts of evidence, and my team had built this tool that would go like through Outlook and take all your stuff and take all of your attachments and everything. And I even had to write a thing to try to guess the passwords and unzip it based on content and all their emails, which was super fun. I was way back in my 20s then. And so we had this thing, and it would get all the data off people's computers, and like e-discovery can be really messy. And so anyway, I totally felt Andrew's pain. And so you want to track and count and detect duplicates, and like what defines a duplicate, because it might look different to a computer, but to you, you're like, oh, obviously those are the same. So he used something called Force Directed app. So it's an app built for Splunk, and it's called Force Directed. And basically, all of his stuff got squished into it, and he's like, I can't see anything. Can you see anything? And he just kept showing us different visualizations, and it's like, that looks awful. Which I found really funny. So then he's like, I know what I'll do. I'll ask everyone I know and see what they're doing, which is actually a thing that I do all the time as a programmer, where I want to see, I like, especially when I worked at the Canadian government, I would call a different department and say, okay, so you have to do a proactive disclosure of your financials every month like we do. Like, how do you automate this? Or do you find this better? Or, what time do you publish it? Like at midnight, or do you do it when you get in the morning, etc. And so asking a bunch of people to find out what the best practice is, like, that's smart, right? So he talked about how some people were using something called RBA, so risk-based alerting, which I really liked, kind of based on what heavier risks are, if that makes sense. And so then he basically, Ebba came up with this network diagram. So it's like network diagram visualization. So it's an app called Network Diagram Viz. And I'm like, but that's what it does. It's visualization. So I found that a bit confusing, but then they started showing us what it looks like. And so Andrew decided he would use this tool for his stuff, even though it was supposed to be on alerting as opposed to like tracking fraudsters. And so Andrew showed us, I guess, what a fraud circle is. So you know how when you watch a movie and they will have those crime walls where they have all the pictures and they have circles and they have like lines drawn and they're like, that person's the murderer. So it's kind of like that, except for that person's the fraudster, except for electronically. Because sometimes you have to drag and move things, and sometimes the things take up way more than an entire wall. And it's easier if you can see these things like with the computer. And so he started using this network diagram visualization tool and then just putting his fraud data in it. And so then he could see basically like fraud rings, and he could have like different visualization, like this is a person, this is a phone number, this is an IP address, like this is like a website that we know is definitely to do with like fraud things in the past, so it's probably still pretty crappy. And yeah, so he used that and he was showing us visualizations with that, and it was way better. So he did write customized code, which he said at the end of the thing he would share. However, I mean, once you get into something really deep, especially when you're doing an investigation, you tend to kind of customize things so it looks the way that makes the sense to your brain, because trying to understand that much data can be hard. But so basically, then he showed us a huge, like 500,000 data set. And he's like, see, it actually makes some sense. And then he showed how he could click it and would kind of bring out one fraud circle for you to look at, and you could click it back down, and it made it smaller so you could see the patterns. And anyway, I thought that was ridiculously cool. And so he wanted it to look like his crime boards, and it did. So he had things like linked by this password to this telephone, to this IP address, to this account, to this website. And I was like, that's pretty cool. I never had that. I was just working with Excel and like log viewers and MS SQL, like, because I do programming, so I'd like put things in the database and I would just be querying and querying. And the idea of having a visualization tool when I had done a lot of previous jobs, I'm like, oh, it would have been so much better. So then Gleb came on, and I haven't seen Gleb talk before, so that was pretty cool. And at first I was like, okay, so he's going to talk about some advantages of, how to do advanced link analysis, and that sounds good. And then he showed us more of like data visualization and some tools, and how like it looked like 100 spider webs or scribbles, but he actually called it spider webs. I'm like, yes, he called it the thing that I see. But then he was like, get out of my way. Let's look at mistakes that we've made in the past, and then let's put those aside, and then let's do a demo to show you how you can avoid those mistakes. So some of the mistakes were like, don't look at all the data at the exact same time. Like when you take the huge wide view at the beginning, it can be really hard to understand, and you kind of have to go down in the weeds at first to see the patterns, to understand even what would form a crime ring. And then he talks about you can't give each piece of data the same weight, especially when it comes to duplicates. So if you have 640 of this, but you have one of that, they're not usually worth the same amount. So it's like, how do you know what weight to give something? So for instance, if it's a credit card number that you know has been busted, right? Like you know that it's bad and it's been canceled. If it comes up again, it's like within a certain amount of time. Okay, well, so we know that that's bad. So it could have a heavier weight versus if the same number comes back a year later, it might just be a reissue from the credit card company. So then he made up this list of things to look for, and I took a screenshot, but I'm not going to just read his slide to you because that would be boring. But he talked about like the quantity and the frequency of things that look weird. And then like rarity, so like things are super rare that are happening or like super different. And again, it's like that doesn't fit, and you sort of need a person sometimes to see that, but he was showing us ways that he had seen this. And then velocity. So I've talked about this before when we talk about logging and alerting from a custom app, like when you should be alerting. So a human being can't try to log in 10 times in 10 seconds. That's too fast for a human. That's a bot. Or a person is not going to try to log in 100 times in 1 hour because they'll just get tired and go do something else. They might feel like they've done it 100 times, but a human being that tries manually to log in 100 times, no, that's a bot. And so I've talked about things like that before when I talk about logging and monitoring, and like you creating the alerts and you creating the logs to be monitored. And so he talked a lot about velocity and like what defines too fast, and then relationships. So, oh, I'm expecting this to be 1-to-1, but it turns out it's 1 to 3,000. That's weird. And so he decided that he would use, so this is like a Splunk event. So of course they're going to show you how to do cool stuff with Splunk. So they came out with a new tool called SigBay link analysis. And basically it looked really cool. So he did a demo. And I was just like, oh, this actually is super understandable, and like I can actually read what's happening. So most of what he showed was gray. And I don't know if you saw my tweets earlier, but someone else was showing a super cool new tool in Splunk, and she made it pink. And I thought that was awesome. And so Gleb's was all in gray, and I have to say, Gleb, pink would have been cooler. But that is aesthetics aside. Basically, it showed you relationships, and it showed you suspicious activity, and you didn't have to write code to make it happen. And so you could drag a whole bunch of things and then see the relationship. So for instance, let's say you have like a bunch of different IP addresses. So you could click on one of them, and then it would show you in the next one like which phone numbers it connects to, and then which, for instance, like other data points that it might connect to, like, oh, this user account logged in from this IP address, but then this user account logged in from this other IP address. So you're like, oh, it logged in from there. Okay, so then you click on that one, and then you can see all the different IP addresses that it's logged in from. And that was really cool. And it kind of like highlighted and brought it all up and made it bigger. And then it would go down when you would unselect it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's very nice. And so a lot of discussion was about the duplicates, because I don't know about you, but I've had this problem too. And so basically, it showed a lot of things like failed login traffic examples, and like if a machine if it looks like a machine is trying to talk to you when it should obviously be a human, like a login screen is for human usually. And so then they also talked about machines where only machines should be talking to them. So for instance, a secret store, like a human shouldn't be logging into a secret store. And so it could kind of like highlight those things for you too, which I really liked. And in summary, threat hunting or like fraud hunting is like pretty cool. And sometimes, so like my job now is like teaching AppSec, but sometimes when I see really cool tools, I think like maybe I want to go get my hands more dirty, if that makes sense. Like teaching is really fun, and I love seeing the light go on for everyone. But then when I see a cool tool like this, I'm like, hey, can I have a free license so I can play with this? Like, is that okay? But luckily a lot of companies say yes, because then I tweet nice things, and if I have bad things to say, I just tell them directly. But yeah, I have a feeling I'm going to be like writing them and asking like, hey, can I see this again? Because that's pretty cool. But anyway, I am supposed to wrap up now with my stream. I'm going to stream again tomorrow. So I'm going to see some more talks tomorrow and actually some more talks today too, because it's not done. And then I'm going to stream again at the same time, same place. So it's kind of cool that Splunk Conf is letting me on their Twitch handle. I thought it was going to be mine. I'm like, oh, I haven't been on in a long time. It's going to be some cricket, so I'm excited that I'm on theirs. Oh, it says you download Splunk download for all on Splunk.com. Yeah. Nice. Thank you. But yeah, the demo was really cool, and I kind of want to go play with it now. And it's weird because I only have demo networks now, because like my real company network is like we just send emails really, and like make slides and things like that. And so it's like so boring compared to when I worked at bigger companies, and I am our IT security team. However, I'm like, I don't get to do cool stuff like that. Okay, yes, I forgot. So tomorrow I'm going to be on at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time if you want to join me again. And then I'm going to talk about logging from custom apps and like what we should log, what we shouldn't log, and how I really, really, really wish that we would finally like send those logs to a SIM. So I see lots of custom app people writing great logs, and they have these alerts going to like nowhere. And if you work at a place where you're so lucky that they have a SIM and they have people watching the SIM, like your custom app should be going to the SIM. So that's what I'm going to talk about, because that's important to me. So thank you so much for coming, Peter and Ben and everyone else. And I will talk to you tomorrow. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference today, and I will see you there tomorrow. Bye, everyone.